So good to meet you. Your story's fascinating, your background, I love it. So thank you for taking a minute out today.
You bet. My pleasure.
So, speaking of being ready for calamities that exist on this planet that come at us, 5 years ago, one of the biggest ones in our lifetime was this pandemic. How did you make it through that COVID time period, and how did it change and affect the way that you carry on in 2025?
Well, I tell you, the pandemic hit at an interesting time in my life because I had started the PR firm at Barkley, a company called Barkley, now Barkley OKRP, in 1987, and was ready to retire about 3 or 4 years ago. And so I set in motion a glide path starting in July of 2019. Well, it was an 18-month glide path. Well, the last 12 months of that was COVID.
Yeah.
So while I was stepping away, I had already passed the baton off, and part of my deal was I could start doing some consulting on my own, which I did. But there I am, instead of going to the office still a couple days a week, basically ripped the Band-Aid off and said, "Well, I am retired. And so I stayed in touch on Zooms with the company and everything. But it really did, in a way, as I look back on it, kind of say, okay, great, my my next chapter is now, and let's go."
Yeah.
So that was interesting, and I really look at it as a positive in that respect, is that it didn't delay or kind of hanging on for another 12 months or so, and I just kind of went at it and did a couple more things with the company, and then got my consulting going, and part of my deal was always had been that whenever I left, I could take crisis track, the crisis process that we created back in the 90s. I could take it with me and the name and the process, and do something with it at some point, which is what I'm doing now.
So, to get a handle on your career arc prior to being a consultant, being a journalist, if I put you in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds at career day and one of the kids in the room wanted to get a good handle on your career, the breadth, and they asked you, what have you done for a living and what do you do for a living now? How do you answer them?
Well, I started out doing what I wanted to do since I was their age, which was get into broadcast journalism. So I did that, and was involved in journalism in high school. Went to the University of Kansas with a great J school there, and went through the broadcast journalism sequence. And while I was still in college, I started working both at public radio in Lawrence, with KANU, now Kansas Public Radio, and the NBC affiliate in Topeka, where I grew up, Topeka, Kansas. And so I was already getting experience while I was still finishing up school. And when I graduated, I got hired by the TV station. So my answer then would have been, I'm doing whatever you think you want to do now. If you have something, I had something in mind, and I stuck to it for a while.
Yeah.
And then I would say, a great opportunity came up. My family had always been involved in politics, and I got asked to join Governor Carlin's staff in Kansas as his assistant press secretary. And that job is basically I was, instead of asking the questions, I'm now answering the questions, or helping my boss answer the questions. And so I made it was a key decision in my career. And I would say to those kids, as I do to, college students when I would talk with them, is you may think you're on a path, but then an opportunity is going to arise, and it may or may not be the right opportunity, but you're going to have to say yes or no to that opportunity. In this case, I had to basically abandon what I'd always wanted to do, in terms of being a broadcast journalist, and decided to do that. So I did that, went through his reelection campaign. I was his press secretary for the second term. So those 11 years of being in the media, both, on camera and then behind the camera, if you will, really became my graduate school and set me up for what I eventually did.
So you always wanted to get into broadcasting. If you take yourself back to when you were a kid, that was your dream.
I wrote a career paper in eighth grade. Our social studies teacher had us write career papers in eighth grade, and that's what I wrote. I still have that paper somewhere in a box. So,
Wow. What were the elements early on? Take me back to where you were born and raised, and what were the early elements that made you want to get into broadcasting?
Well, I was born in Topeka, Kansas, which is the capital. And I said my family had always been involved in politics, going back to my grandfather. So I grew up in that environment of being, engaged and understanding, and discussions, even as a kid with the family about politics and everything, and what's going on in the world, current events. So I always had that in the background. That was always like the foundation. And I think, I just think I remember, I remember setting up a map in my bedroom and being the weather guy, and all that. And then in 1966, I'm 11 or 10 years old, going to be 11 that year. A big tornado hit Topeka. It went through, it was on the ground for 25 miles. We had just moved 3 months. We were just 3 months into a new house, right into on the edge of the path of the tornado. Well, that night in Kansas, on WIBW TV, Channel 13, there was a guy who was doing the weather and the news there. And he went on television and made this famous quote of "My God, take cover" as the tornado bore down on Topeka. Well, his name was Bill Curtis. Bill Curtis became a renowned journalist for CBS and ended up in Chicago anchoring the news there. He's still on. He does something with an NPR show now.
Yeah.
But that kind of like, so that happened, and I was watching the television when he said that, and so there I'm at 10 or 11. So I think all that kind of just was there, and I just kind of was interested in it, and I thought that would be a fun thing to do when I grew up.
So who else did you emulate? Was there a journalist that you looked up to, like a Cronkite, somebody that you emulated that helped you find your footing and your voice in the world?
Yeah, I think early on, when I was growing up, certainly Walter Cronkite was there. Huntley and Brinkley were on NBC. Chet Huntley and David Brinkley, and David Brinkley continued his career. I always really liked him. And then just watching local news, there are probably people that I go back to and remember, because that's kind of where you're going to start is locally. But yeah, I always had that interest. And then as I got into college and got into it, I really became aware of people like Edward R. Murrow, more of the history of of the people who built the foundations of great journalism, and really read a lot about Edward R. Murrow. And in college, I took a class called Propaganda and Censorship. It was taught by a great professor at KU. His name was Calder Pickett, and it was a great class because, and that may be where like the seeds were planted about, I'm not saying PR is propaganda, but there are those people who would say that, but it's persuasiveness, kind of spending a whole semester looking at, that. And I wrote, it dug in deep with the whole Joseph McCarthy, the Red Scare era.
Yeah.
And that's what I wrote my main paper about. So I did a lot of research on that. So I was also kind of just as understanding that there's this other side of things where people are trying to influence what the media is saying and doing, not always in a good way, but understanding that is out there. And so I think it kind of all. So while I still was all in on broadcast journalism and did it for 6 years, I think there were seeds planted that there's people out there who are doing things to help create content and persuade media and the public to take some action one way or another.
So who was an inspirational force or a hero in your life that's allowed you to evolve and flower through your career up to this point?
Well, I always respected and really revered Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah.
So my mother, my folks were big Kennedy fans, John Kennedy, and I was when he was president, I was like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and of course, 68 with the assassinations and everything. But I got to know Bobby Kennedy kind of. I read about him earlier, and so his assassination was a huge thing to me because I had really, yes, John Kennedy had been president, and I was aware, but for some reason I had really connected with Bobby Kennedy and his approach, and know that the world would be a different place if that hadn't happened today. So I think that was part of it from a political standpoint, and then like I said, from a news standpoint, it was the people of the day, and a quick story, about the difference between broadcast journalism and print journalism, where you have more time to do stuff. And I did public radio for a while, where I had 3 minutes to do a story. I get to the TV station, they tell you, you got a minute 10 tonight. Oh, and that includes the anchor intro, so you really only have 60 seconds to tell
Wow.
this story.
Yeah.
But there's this great story about David Brinkley about how you just succinct and you don't have to overdo. And so the day that one of the great former leaders of the world and of Great Britain during World War II passed away, Huntley and Brinkley show come up, and David Brinkley comes on the air, and all he said was, Winston Churchill died today. Here's the story. He didn't do an elaborate
Yep.
1 minute, he just said, because that's all he had to say was something like, and it just, that stuck with me when it happened. And I read about it later too, that's that, communication just in its simplest form is best,
Yeah.
and that you don't need to. And so I think I carried that along, because we had a mantra at the PR firm that we would talk to clients about, is that our focus is going to be single voice, simple message. We're going to speak as a corporation with a single voice and understand what our messages are going to be, but they're also going to be very simple. And like, for an example, we'd have clients who were doing product launches, and they'd want to talk about the 73 things the product could do for you. And we'd have to talk them off the ledge and say, you can't talk about 73 things because you'll lose everybody. What's one or two, maybe big things that it does? Get them in the door, and then you can tell them about the other 71 things. But that was always a battle with clients because, they're proud. They've spent time R&D working on this stuff, and boom, let's roll it out there.
Yeah.
But we always try to focus on that single voice, simple message as our foundation.
Are you alarmed at where we're going with journalism in this modern world where journalism journalists are becoming the enemy? There's so much disinformation that's happening out there. There's rampant corruption that no one can pin down. It just keeps kind of spinning, and it just seems like we're in this kind of cynical cycle. And I bring this up in the context of you've seen different eras, especially as a journalist, in very specific and more hyper focused ways. Are you alarmed by what's going on, or is this just another level of democracy playing itself out?
No, I'm alarmed. I think that's the right word, because I have been involved in it. And just for context, when I worked at the television station, it was in Topeka, Kansas, again the NBC affiliate. I was there for 4 years, and when I started there, we were still shooting 16 millimeter film to do the story. So in other words, you'd have to go out. We all had our own little bell. Every reporter had a Bell and Hell 60 millimeter camera. Then we had our camera guys that would go with us to shoot packages and stuff. But we're shooting film, which means you got to get the film back. You got to be back at the station by 3 o'clock in order to make the 6 o'clock news.
Yeah.
Because they've got to process the film, edit the film, get it ready, and you got to go in and. So that's where I started. By the time I left, we were doing live shots, and in between, videotape happened. So I was there I look back on that, just think how lucky I was that I was there because TV was the big thing then. That's what 20 somethings, 30 somethings today need to understand. There was no internet, there was no, and television was it. It was the the social media platforms of today.
Yeah.
Because that's what, and politicians wanted to understand TV. And that's one of the reasons I got hired as a press secretary, because I've been in television. I mean, the guy who hired me told me, he said, you got a political background, pedigree, so I can get that side sold. More importantly, you understand television. So I was at the TV station. We went there from film to live with video in between. And it was a great time. So that was huge and then all the technology changes since, and you just have to keep moving and changing with it. But what's happening today is, and part of it is because we're all journalists now, everybody thinks they're a journalist because
Yeah.
they simply, hold their phone up and record what's happening. And then, with 3 clicks, they put it out there.
Yeah.
And that's not journalism. That's simply, whatever we call it, but it's not journalism. I mean, so the fact that, back to your point about the enemy, I brought into the PR firm because as time went on, we were hiring people who were not coming out of journalism backgrounds. A lot of folks were like me early. We had journalism in our background, then we went to PR. We're now hiring people who are, kids who are coming out of college with degrees in PR or degrees in advertising and have no sense of journalism. I would always bring that into the PR firm to help people understand, look, we're working for two people. There's two people involved in our relationship. It's our client who we're working for and who's paying us to do, to come up with ideas for them. But the media is also our other partner in a way. I mean, we need them. So we need to develop relationships. We need to build trust with them that when we come to them with a story, it's going to be legit. It's not going to be just puffery. And there's something really we believe here. Now, you may decide as a journalist not to cover our story, that's fine, but we're going to present it in a way that at least says, look, this here's something that's going on. We think you'll be interested. Here's why we think you should be interested, because here's how it could impact people who are watching, listening, or reading your content. And so keep that in mind. I would tell everybody is that yes, we're working for our client, and they're paying us, but we've also got to have relationships on the other side.
Yeah.
They're not the enemy. They're not the enemy. And I tell you, I saw it happen. Just that slow erosion over time of CEOs and people we were working with of just not trusting the media anymore, or having, because of what they were, as we all kind of went into our camps, our media camps, whatever they were watching or viewing, I could see that influence begin to think, so now we've got an extra hurdle with this CEO because they believe that the media is out to get them. We've got to convince that person that no, they're not, and here's why we need them not to think that that's what you think.
Yeah.
And it became more and more of a struggle. And today, I think it's probably as bad as ever. I still do some consulting, and I'm working with a client right now that has a good understanding of media which is great. And I worked for a governor who definitely got it and understood that it's a two-way street. I mean, yes, we want them to report exactly what we say,
Yeah.
down to 100%, knowing that it's not going to happen that way. But as long as we're accessible and transparent, and that's the other thing that's happened is, and I have to blame my profession, a PR profession, partially because, we told people just keep saying the same thing over and over again. But there's a certain method to that single voice, can go too far, where we're saying what we want to say, and we don't believe anybody else is right.
Yeah.
And that's where it's gotten too far. It's fine to have a message, but you have to understand that message is not necessarily the only right answer that's out there.
Yeah. So with, boots on the ground as a journalist, what story did you cover? What interview did you conduct? What moment did you have that shook your foundation the most in covering news?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I remember doing a story, going to the state penitentiary in Lansing, Kansas State Penitentiary, to interview the new warden there. I was covering state government at the time. I'd been covering state government for both public radio and then for the TV station. So went up there and to do the interview. And I'll never forget, we checked in at the front gate, and then we drove and parked. And then we walked in to actually walking into the prison, and hearing that gate shut behind me was all the deterrent I ever needed to make sure it. But it always stuck with me, Joe. It was like, I mean, there are people in here who have been, convicted of crimes, and they're serving their sentences, and this is it. That gate shuts behind you. They're there for however long they're sentenced to. And that always stuck with me as just a kind of a, wow, and then we went in and interviewed the warden and left. But I always remember that. I think the other thing is there would just be from a state government perspective, one of the reasons that I think I got hired to work with Governor Carlin was he had proposed. I'm going to make this story very short, but he had proposed a severance tax in oil and gas, which had never been done in Kansas. Texas had one, Oklahoma had one, but Kansas oil industry had always fought it. And, we were looking for new ways to raise revenue other than just raising sales taxes and property tax and everything else. And so I covered the first year of that when it was first introduced. I covered that story, and it really became this giant battle between the special interests representing the oil and gas industry, and in this case, the governor, and not just Democrats, but also it was a coalition of Democrats and Republicans that were behind it. But it didn't get past that first year. Passed the House, the Senate, put their fist down and said no. Then I got hired for his last year of his first term, and we proposed the severance tax again. And so now I'm on the other side of it.
Yeah.
Once again, House passed it, Senate killed it. Boom. He had the best campaign issue that I think I've ever seen. Now, of course, I was on the inside of it, but it became he went out and campaigned on that issue and won handily re-election. And as a Democrat in Kansas, that's the governor's the one office that always flips back and forth.
Yeah.
I think that's the way Kansas have always said. We'll keep some things balanced here. We'll have so Democratic government ever since the 50s, it's almost toggled back and forth every 4 to 8 years,
Yeah.
which is interesting. But anyway, that
Yeah.
covering that and then being on the other side of it, and then seeing the power of that issue to get him reelected was really a great experience,
So what?
and served me well in terms of messaging, the
Sure.
power of a message, that single voice
Totally.
hammering home. We would have, he would get, he would get frustrated because he said, "I'm giving the same speech, 5 times." Yeah, you are, and you got to keep doing it. These people haven't heard it yet.
Yeah.
And I understood his frustration. We all did, but we were the ones that had to say, "But you got to keep saying it," because again, we're in Leoti, Kansas tonight, and they haven't heard you yet.
Yep.
So go tell those folks that what you're all about. And so that became, that's why I think the single voice, simple message thing became key to me as we built the PR firm.
So the one thing that's become a part of your focus is crisis preparedness. What is it about your career in journalism, everything that you've experienced professionally that got you to this point where you're making sure that people, because when I read your bio and got in there, I was like, I need to go out and get some water. I need to go out and get some stuff. Like I felt it. And I feel it more now in this modern world we live in. But what got you to this point where you want people to be aware and prepared?
Well, being a journalist was the starting point because you're out there covering people's problems. I mean, we talked about the bigger issues of about I cover, but I also had to go out and cover, house fires and auto accidents, and and the day to day grind that people go through, the problems they have. I was city hall reporter for a while, and you go to city commission meetings and hear people coming in saying that the issues they have, and so it's just every day. I mean, there's and crisis is a big word that everybody kind of but there's personal crises too. So I think that was being a reporter and kind of covering the things that happen to people, set it in motion. Then working in politics, because every day there's crises of different magnitudes, but there's just always something going on that you got to deal with and handle. And so that became, as press secretary, that became my job. It's like anything that was going public, good or bad, comes through our office, and we got to handle it and work as the governor. You're working just for the governor's office, but I was also working as press secretary with all the communications people and all the agencies. So, which our message was, you give us the good stuff to announce and we'll give you the bad stuff that you have to announce. and,
Yeah.
but I think, again, it's like every day. And then when I, got into PR, worked for another firm for a year before I went to Barkley in 87 to start the PR firm there. I just took all that experience with me. It's like, and so then in the early 90s, I'd, been at the PR firm about 5 years. We won a piece of business. The whole company did advertising agency and a PR firm. So I started the PR firm in a conjunction with the ad agency.
Okay.
At Barkley. So they did not have one and they wanted one. We started it. So, but we picked up this client who was a fast food restaurant chain, and the head of their communications approached me early on and said, I'm really worried. We're growing so fast. They were only in like 15 states at the time, and now they're a national brand. And she said, I'm really worried that we're not ready to manage a crisis. And in the food business, it only takes one mistake by one person to set something off that becomes a national brand issue.
Yeah.
So I said, great, let's get our teams together. So she brought her team to Kansas City. We got in a room for about 2.5 days, and hammered out what we now call crisis track. And she and I agreed on one thing going in. We both had seen crisis plans at companies where there's 3 big notebooks up on the shelf and nobody ever pulls them off.
Yeah.
Let's keep this as simple, the fewest steps possible, so that we know what we have to do. So we created the 5 steps: build the team, identify what can go wrong, all the risks that can go wrong. Let's map out the first X number of steps we're going to take regardless of the crisis, because yes, every crisis is different, but there's also 8 things, 10 things, 6 things that you want to do right up front. Let's get those mapped out so we know what they are. Let's get key messages built for every one of the risks we've identified. So we have an immediate message to start from, so we don't have to get in a room and spin one up for an hour and waste time. And then the fifth one is, who's the spokesperson, who's going to deliver the messaging, and 5 steps. And it worked. We worked it with them, and then I was taking her to the airport, and I said, I know we did this with you, but this is a process. If you're okay with it, I'd like to put it together and be able to offer it to other clients. She said, of course, it's yours. It's your process. You guys came up with it,
Yeah.
and so we developed it, gave it a name, Crisis Track, TRAK. Got to have a cute name in there,
Yeah.
for marketing purposes. And it became a business door opener for us. We would get hired to come in and do Crisis Track by companies who had PR firms already,
Yeah.
but they weren't doing this.
Yeah.
And this is like one of our, we did all the regular PR, but this was especially, as was cause branding became a special. And we used those 2 verticals to become kind of our business builders, to get us indoors where we couldn't get in just because they already had a PR firm.
Yeah. So in this fascinating life you've lived in the news and covering events and helping people be better prepared, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
Well, I'm very proud of the crisis work, because it is the most important PR you do
Yeah.
for an organization. And we did it not just for companies, but for nonprofits and educational institutions. So that's the most important, because if a company is prepared for a crisis and one happens, I guarantee you it's going to be over faster than if you have don't even know who the team is going to be when the crisis happens. You got to go around and pick out the people. And again, the clock is ticking. And today, the clock ticks real fast, and you can't afford it. So you're better prepared. It's going to end faster. I guarantee it will. So that's good. And then I mentioned cause branding, because we were one of the early adapters of cause marketing in the country. We were part of an organization called IPREX, which is a group of a couple, like 100 or so independent PR firms around the world. So we collectively make ourselves more powerful by grouping together to compete with holding companies and all that stuff, the big PR firms. But a woman by the name of Carol Cohn, who's really considered the founder of cause marketing back in the day. Her firm was independent at the time. And so at one of our meetings, I got into a conversation with her at dinner and said, this just seems real interesting. And we talked about it. And she said, well, you need to go do it. And here's somebody who's, has the right attitude about it. It's like, I want to grow the concept of cause marketing. So I want more people doing it. I
Yeah.
can't do it by myself. And so I did. I came back and talked to everybody about it. We eventually actually, made a focus on that. So that resulted in some of the greatest campaigns we worked on. We created Lee National Denim Day with Lee Jeans,
Yeah.
which became one of the paramount breast cancer fundraisers every year. For 21 years, we created for Sonic drive-ins. We created Limeades for Learning, which benefited teachers in the classroom,
Yeah.
public school teachers. We created. We worked then with the Komen Foundation, who had been a partner with Lee Jeans, and they hired us to be their PR firm for the whole brand for a while. And then later, we just did their 3-day March of Dimes hired us, and the March of Dimes work may be back to your original question, may be the thing I'm most proud of in terms of our cause work, because we were hired by the March of Dimes. They wanted to rebrand, and we got on the list again because we established ourselves as a leader in this category. So we were beginning to get invited in to pitches, and they were doing one, and so we met with them, and their board was concerned that they needed to change their name, that the March of Dimes no longer meant anything. So that was one of the facts we had as we were developing our ideas to go back to them with. So we developed our ideas, went back to do the presentation to them. They're in New York, and White Plains, New York is where they're headquartered, north of the city. And We went in and said, first of all, don't change your name. You have like 98% name recognition.
Yeah.
You don't have enough, no one has enough money to change that. So, but we said, there is something you should change. So the March of Dimes had created, believe it or not, the first actual charity walk that, was ever done. Now we think of, the walks and the 5Ks and everything. They were the first one, and they named it Walk America.
Yeah.
Well, when it was the only one or one of few, that was a great name. Now it doesn't say one thing about what they're doing. So we said, don't change your name because you don't want to do that. March of Dimes has too much equity, but change Walk America to March for Babies.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is we tie into the brand with the word March, and we're telling people what they're marching for. And they loved it.
Yeah.
And that change was made. And we made some other, then we were doing a whole rebrand. So we did there's a lot of creative work and all that stuff. So we did a little campaign. So we're finished presenting. And the woman who was the head of the March of Dimes at the time was a pediatrician by trade. And she'd been the head of March of Dimes for like 20 years at that point. And she said, okay, Mike, I have a question and a comment. I said, great. She goes, well, my question is, how much is this going to cost? And I said, I don't know. I said, I can tell you it's not going to be cheap. It will be probably a six, seven figures. But until we know exactly what you want to do, I can't put a cost to it. And she said, that's fair. I appreciate your candor there. And then her comment was to her group. So we're presenting to her direct reports of about 12 people in the room. She turns to them and she goes, we need to do all of this that they just presented to us. And the only people that are going to not make this happen are the people sitting around this table. We need to get behind this. And I want you to get behind. And, I turned to my colleague and just looked at her, and she caught my look. And it's like, we couldn't get out of the room fast enough. It's like anything else we say,
Yeah.
from that point on it could hurt us.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
there were a few questions which we answered, of course, but I mean, it was the only time I really knew before the presentation was over that we'd won the business.
Yeah.
And so it was gratifying. And then we went on to do great work with them for a decade or plus. And that's the other thing that I'm real proud of is that we kept the average length of a client agency relationship today is like 3 years. We had clients for 20 plus years, 15 years, 10 years. And the founder of Barkley, a guy named Bill Fromm, always had this great thing he talked about. It's talk about the lifetime value of a client. And he quoted somebody else one time saying, I heard a guy say once, I'd rather have a $1 million a year client for 10 years than a $10 million client for 1 year. And so Bill really drummed that into us. And so the lifetime value, it means something because you don't have the business churn. You don't have to replace so much business every year.
Yeah.
But anyway, so those, long answers, I'm sorry, but those are the things I'm proud of.
So at the end of the day, Mike, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, everyone you work with, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, I think I feel like I've been a guy who people can trust that I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do, and that doesn't always mean I accomplish that, but my intent is there that I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do, and if hurdles are thrown up that keep me from getting there as fast, then I just got to figure out how to jump over there. So I think that's what that's my perception of what I think people think of me, and I like to have fun too while I'm working. So we kept it fun because in PR we're not doing rocket science, but we are doing important work, especially the two things I talked about, crisis and cause. We're doing important work that can help change things and change not just change perceptions, but actually change things. And the work we did in cause certainly did that. The work we did in crisis certainly did that. So I think that's those two things are, were always important to me to be trustworthy and have some fun while we're doing it.
I love it. So if anyone wants to dive in, they have questions, they want to be better prepared, where's the best place for them to go to get all this?
Two places. My LinkedIn profile is all crisis all the time, except for the podcast that I'm a co-host of, Kansas City Marketing Legends. So you'll see stuff on there. But my LinkedIn profile has a lot of content on crisis.
Okay.
And when this episode is published, it'll be up there for people to listen to.
Excellent.
So that's a good place to go just for content and absorb knowledge about crisis. And then crisistrack.com, crisistrack.com is where people can go. And I've produced 9 videos that they can purchase for just under $1,000. And in those 9 videos, it spells out how to build crisis track, your process for yourself and your organization, regardless of the size. Obviously, I'm gearing it more towards smaller organizations who can't afford PR firms and stuff. But here's a way for you to have this simple 5-step process to put it together in your organization. And if somebody has an issue or something, they can get a hold of me, and I'll jump on a Zoom with them or a phone call or whatever and help them through it. But it's pretty self-explanatory, and that's one of the beauties of it is an organization can watch these videos and just have somebody tasked with, okay, let's put this in place, and they can do it.
Wonderful. I will put all that in the show notes. Mike, this has been an absolute joy. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Joe, for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thank you.